Hari ini, Perdana Menteri yang juga Menteri Kewangan Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim akan memberikan penjelasan terperinci di Parlimen berkaitan pemberian khas berdasarkan 40% hasil Sabah. Antara lain, ia menyusul perbincangan isu berkenaan secara mendalam dalam mesyuarat khas Kabinet pada Rabu. Ini termasuk pertimbangan konsensus berhubung isu-isu yang berkaitan dengan 40% mengikut perkara 112C dan perkara 112D Perlembagaan Persekutuan.
Menurut Perdana Menteri, keputusan mengenainya tidak akan dirayu. Sebaliknya, yang dirayu ialah keputusan penghakiman dengan beliau akan menjelaskan secara terperinci perkara itu di Parlimen. Kerajaan Persekutuan pada Selasa memutuskan untuk tidak membuat rayuan terhadap pemberian khas negeri Sabah berdasarkan 40% hasil sebagaimana diputuskan dalam permohonan semakan kehakiman difailkan oleh Sabah Law Society terhadap Kerajaan Malaysia. Jabatan Peguam Negara AGC dalam kenyataan maklumkan kerajaan menghormati prinsip tersebut sebagaimana yang diperuntukkan di bawah Perlembagaan Persekutuan. Serentak itu, ia akan memulakan proses rundingan bersama Kerajaan Sabah dengan kadar segera. AGC turut maklumkan bahawa nasihat undang-undang telah diberikan kepada Jemaah Menteri berkaitan kecacatan dalam alasan penghakiman Mahkamah Tinggi.
Malaysia Aviation Group MAG, syarikat induk kepada Malaysia Airlines pada Rabu mengumumkan bahawa Datuk Kapten Izham Ismail akan bersara daripada jawatan pengarah urusan kumpulan pada 31 Januari 2026 selepas lebih 40 tahun berkhidmat dengan syarikat tersebut. Dalam kenyataan MAG, Malaysia Airlines memaklumkan bahawa Ketua Pegawai Operasi semasa Kapten Nasaruddin A. Bakar akan mengambil alih sebagai Presiden dan Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif kumpulan menggantikan peranan pengarah urusan kumpulan.
Izham 64 tahun telah menerajui MAG dan Malaysia Airlines selama 8 tahun dan merupakan ketua pegawai eksekutif paling lama berkhidmat sejak syarikat penerbangan nasional itu menjalani proses pemulihan menyeluruh melalui Pelan 12 Mata Pemulihan MAS pada tahun 2014. Nasaruddin yang mempunyai lebih 30 tahun pengalaman dalam operasi penerbangan dan pengurusan membawa kepakaran luas serta pemahaman mendalam terhadap perniagaan, budaya dan aspirasi strategik MAG. Beliau pernah mengetuai pelbagai inisiatif transformasi termasuk kejayaan pemulihan Maswings pada 2022 dan pelaksanaan struktur berorientasikan keuntungan di bawah Pelan Perniagaan Jangka Panjang 2.0. Sebagai Presiden dan Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif, beliau akan memantau pelaksanaan keutamaan strategik kumpulan dengan fokus kepada kecemerlangan operasi, pengalaman pelanggan dan pertumbuhan mampan merangkumi bahagian penerbangan dan bukan penerbangan. Ahli lembaga MAG merangkap pengarah urusan Khazanah Nasional Berhad Datuk Amirul Faizal Wan Zahir berkata, lembaga yakin sepenuhnya terhadap kepimpinan Nasaruddin untuk memacu keutamaan strategik MAG dan mengukuhkan kedudukan kumpulan dalam lanskap penerbangan global yang kompetitif. Khazanah memiliki 83.58% pegangan dalam MAG.
Ringgit ditutup lebih tinggi berbanding dolar Amerika pada Rabu, meneruskan pengukuhan untuk hari dagangan ke-7 berturut-turut selepas para pelabur kekal positif menjelang pengundian pembukaan semula Kerajaan Amerika Syarikat. Pada 6 petang Rabu, ringgit menukuk kepada 4.1315 berbanding dolar. Ketua Ekonomi Bank Malaysia Malaysia Bank Berhad, Dr. Muhammad Azzi Nazam Abdul Rashid berkata, Dewan Perwakilan Amerika akan membuang undi mengenai pembukaan semula kerajaan. Ringgit terus mendapat sokongan keyakinan daripada para peniaga dan pelabur khususnya dengan keluaran dalam negara kasar Malaysia KDNK bagi suku ketiga pada 2025 yang akan diumumkan Jumaat ini dijangka berkembang melebihi 5.0%. Beliau menjangkakan KDNK akan mencecah 5.2% pada suku ketiga dengan kadar OPR dijangka kekal pada 2.75% dalam masa terdekat. Alright, now we're diving into one of the most transformative forces of our time, artificial intelligence. It's no longer a buzzword. Globally, AI is projected to become a $757 billion America market by 2025, creating 12 million jobs and reshaping industries, economies, and also geopolitics. So from supply chains to investment strategies, AI is rewriting the rules of competition, and governments are racing to strike the right balance between innovation and also ethics. Malaysia Malaysia is seizing this moment with National AI Office or NAIO 2021 until 2025 roadmap and 5.9 billion ringgit in R&D investments across agriculture, healthcare and also education. But big questions remain. How do we harness AI to strengthen our economy, cultivate world-class talent and improve lives? The stakes are high. AI could add 530 billion ringgit to Malaysia's economy by 2030, yet it also raises questions about ethics, talent and also sovereignty. So joining us to unpack these issues is Nicholas Gordon, the editor at Fortune Asia. Good morning, Nicholas.
Good morning. Good morning. It's great to be here.
Amazing. So AI is projected to contribute over 15 trillion US dollars to the global economy by 2030. And we're seeing the US, China and also the EU harden their AI strategies, with China with state-led industrial policy and the EU with strict AI Act compliance. So from your vantage point, how is AI rewriting the rules of global competition, and where does Southeast Asia fit in this new hierarchy?
Well, AI is clearly kind of rewriting the rules of the game. It's probably one of the most strategic technologies to have emerged in the past kind of decade. The US is rushing ahead on this. China is rushing ahead on this. Other countries are trying to carve their own space in this technological arms race. And so it'll be very interesting to see where kind of other countries, other regions like Southeast Asia try to find their own place in the development to make better and more powerful AI models. One thing to pay attention to, I think, is the development of sovereign AI, this idea that of governments supporting local AI development and local AI capability to kind of ensure that they control the model and they control how the data is used. And that's an increasingly important policy prerogative in places like South Korea, in places like Thailand. Within Southeast Asia, you are seeing countries starting to develop their own AI strategy. Singapore kind of took the lead on this in 2019. They put forward their plan to be an AI nation. Malaysia as well is also pushing forward on this and kind of investing in the infrastructure behind AI, things like data centers, things like semiconductor manufacturing. But other countries in the region too, you're starting to see the early stages of them figuring out what their AI strategies will be.
But let's look at the context of Malaysia. Like I mentioned earlier, Malaysia's national roadmap 2021 until 2025 is 63% complete, and the government just announced 3.29 billion ringgit in AI investments for the first half of 2025 alone. So this is to aim at the raise tax GDP contribution from 23.5% to 25.5% by year end. And plus, the National AI Action Plan 2026 until 2030 will expand governance and also ethics frameworks. So do these moves position Malaysia as a serious AI player, or are we still in catch-up mode compared to Singapore and also Indonesia?
I think it is perhaps still in catch-up mode, but it's probably further ahead than some of its peers. Malaysia, I think, has a great opportunity here in that it can kind of work with multiple players in the AI ecosystem. It can work with Western players, it can work with Chinese players, and be able to benefit from the advantages of both. It also has a great opportunity in terms of leveraging its existing advantages in terms of electricity, in terms of manufacturing, and again, kind of build the AI infrastructure that will support kind of this new technology. And also, the policymakers in Malaysia, I think, are thinking very carefully about the opportunities and the challenges that AI can bring. If you have a look at Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim's book released over the summer, he talks a lot about the opportunities and the challenges that may come from what he deems kind of the ungoverned expansion of AI. So I think Malaysian policymakers are thinking very carefully about not just the opportunities, but a way to kind of protect against some of the challenges and the risks that ungoverned expansion of AI might bring to a society.
But speaking of progress, in your opinion, where does Malaysia stand in the regional landscape, and how does actually different regulatory approaches impact AI competitiveness across Southeast Asia? Nicholas.
Well, as I said, I think we're still kind of in the early stages of this for a lot of countries in Southeast Asia. Again, Singapore has a plan, Malaysia has a plan, Thailand is investing in sovereign AI too, so kind of those I see are the countries that are maybe kind of helping to lead the way a little bit. But everyone, I think, is thinking about, again, how to integrate themselves into this new ecosystem, how to take advantage of the opportunities that may come into play, and how to tap the resources that are out there to really kind of build up AI capabilities locally, whether that's in terms of infrastructure, whether that's in terms of talent, whether that's in terms of support for startups, whether that's in terms of, again, working with other major partners around the world for AI. I think a lot of countries are thinking very carefully about this and, starting to move ahead on this, but it's still early stages, I think.
In your opinion as well, that we want to look at the trends because it's a dynamic landscape of AI, but what's the most significant AI-driven business trends that you are actually observing in the region? And what kind of AI-led innovation are you seeing from businesses in Malaysia specifically?
Well, it's hard to pick just one trend. There's kind of a lot of them. But one thing that's definitely on my mind right now is energy. Data centers require a lot of energy. You're getting comments out of places like the United States that it's tough to expand AI infrastructure because there's just not enough power out there to power the data centers that do all the inference and do all the training. I think that's going to be a very big question going forward throughout Southeast Asia, but also particularly in Malaysia, which does have some advantages when it comes to providing electricity. I'm also looking at kind of the spread of open source AI models, particularly from China. I think an undercovered story right now is the role that open source models like Alibaba's QN are playing in businesses around the region and around the world, not just in Southeast Asia. Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky came out the other day and admitted that his company is also using Alibaba's AI model in addition to other models as well. Then when it comes to businesses, I think there's a question of how you get more employees to adopt AI. Executives love it. Entry-level employees, I think, are very interested in this. They're using it themselves. But it's kind of middle managers, people who are actually having to put these plans into practice, that I think are still struggling a bit on how to adopt AI into their own processes without necessarily threatening their own jobs and their own work. So there's a lot of tricky things to balance here when it comes to businesses and how they think about AI. And, and we're going to be talking about all of these things at Fortune. We have several AI events throughout the year. We have Brainstorm AI in Singapore over the summer, and we're going to be discussing all of these issues in Malaysia next week at the Innovation Forum from November 17th to 18th, whether it's data centers and power or how companies using AI or open source versus closed source. These are all topics we're going to be covering next week on the 17th and 18th in Kuala Lumpur.
But in spite of the challenges that I mentioned earlier, talent is one of the most important things when it comes to AI. Speaking of which, Huawei has pledged to train 30,000 Malaysian AI professionals, and also Talent Corp launched the My Mahir National AI Council that is to align the skills with industry needs. Yet, Cognizant wants the Malaysia race remaining an AI user rather than AI producer. So what structural changes, perhaps in terms of education, immigration, R&D incentives, that must Malaysia implement to avoid a brain drain and truly lead in AI innovation?
I do think talent's going to be a very big question going forward. It's whether to keep talent, how to retain talent, how to make sure that Malaysia has the talent it needs to, build and operate these AI models at home. And unfortunately, I don't quite have the answer in terms of what Malaysia's education strategy should be, but it would probably include a mix of kind of ensuring that there is an ecosystem that can keep talent at home, give them opportunities at home to work on, to build their own AI startups, to kind of develop their own models, to experiment with open source models and make it work in the Malaysian context. I also think that there's an opportunity here, again, to kind of build Malaysian AI for Malaysia. Again, this push towards sovereign AI, I think, is going to become a much bigger trend over the next few years as countries outside of the US and outside of China start to think about how they can make AI work better for them, work better for their people, and work better for their businesses.
So in terms of media, as an editor, Nicholas, how can media actually cover AI both ethically and also accurately at the same time? And what is Fortune doing in this space? How are you driving the AI conversation now?
Well, I think when it comes to covering AI accurately, it's a business like any other. So you don't necessarily have to think about covering it in some specific special way. It's a new technology. It's very exciting, but it's a business like any other. There's a potential for massive social and economic change thanks to AI, and it'd be wrong for reporters and media outlets to ignore that. But there's also a lot of hype in the industry. Developers often talk about how scared they are of what they've created, which can maybe be a roundabout way of talking about how powerful their product is. So it's worth being sober-minded about this too. So I guess for people who are thinking about AI, studying AI, talking about AI, one shouldn't ignore the possibility of kind of pretty big social and economic change and the disruptions that might come from that. But they should also be wary of hyping it up too much, of thinking that it's going to really kind of radically transform everything that we do. Some of these existential risks people talk about. It's worth being a little bit, I think, sober-minded about what this technology is. So it's an interesting space. It's kind of a difficult needle to thread, but we in the media, I think, have a lot of work to do and can do a lot in illuminating this for people. And as I mentioned, us at Fortune, we cover AI consistently throughout the year. We're covering all the big players, whether that's OpenAI or Anthropic, through to writing about DeepSeek and Alibaba, to writing about Singapore and Malaysia's work in AI. We cover that pretty consistently. And we convene several events where we bring together experts in AI, both in terms of developers, large businesses, researchers, and have them discuss kind of all of these issues, the opportunities that AI brings, and how to maybe have guardrails against some of the risks that might emerge.
I totally understand where you're coming from, Nicholas, because no matter how fast we're moving, AI somehow always moves faster. But looking ahead to 2026 to 2027, what story about Southeast Asia and AI that do you think will be most important? Are there any exciting developments you have observed in Malaysia, especially when Malaysia is chairing ASEAN this year and spearheaded the ASEAN AI Safety Network to promote ethical innovation? So how do you see regional cooperation evolving? Will ASEAN harmonize AI standards or will national interests dominate?
I think a place like Malaysia has the opportunity to actually maybe do both, again, is to kind of leverage its advantages to kind of make AI work for the country, to help Malaysia fit into this kind of global ecosystem for this new technology. But also, again, ASEAN is an asset for Malaysia. By working together, they have greater leverage and greater resources to develop these AI systems that work best for Southeast Asians. One question that will be on my mind going forward is, as AI becomes more efficient, as places like DeepSeek in China prove that you can have really powerful AI models without needing to spend lots and lots and lots of money on computer chips, whether or not those insights and those lessons make their way to more regional economies and local players, like ASEAN, and can the advantages that can be gleaned from training powerful models with fewer resources, whether other countries can take advantage of that and build powerful AI models for themselves, again, without needing to spend huge amounts of money on very expensive AI processors.
All right, that was Nicholas Gordon, the editor at Fortune Asia. And indeed, AI isn't just a technological revolution, it's a strategic one. And Malaysia's choices today will define its role in the global economy for decades. And you can find this whole discussion on all of our social media platforms. And thanks again, Nicholas. And for now, we'll have to go for a short break. Stay tuned for more updates after this with my colleague, Ibrahim Sani.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Cara kita mendapat berita kian berubah. Melalui media sosial maupun saluran digital yang lain serta kaca TV. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini.
Kita ni buat sesuatu yang berbeza.
Keteraskan acuan verifikasi yang diamalkan supaya setiap fakta adalah sahih. Daripada analisis pelbagai sudut yang mendalam, laporan-laporan khas dan perbincangan yang membina negara. Inklusif, suara rakyat kami ajukan. Keseimbangan persepsi kami pastikan. Kerana setiap cerita mempunyai impak yang tersendiri dan perlu dibawa dengan penelitian yang terperinci. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada. Saluran berita paling dipercayai di Malaysia.
Thanks for joining us. This is The Economy. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. The Sabah elections is just around the corner. In a few days' time, we're going to see the nomination day, and in 2 weeks' time, we're going to see the polling day start. And this is, of course, the first of a series of elections that is going to go through for Malaysia. The next one would be Melaka and Sarawak and Johor, and of course the big one, the general elections that has to be done by February 2028. So all this is actually predicated on the Sabah elections first. So there's a lot of eyes on this state election, and of course we're trying to understand a little bit better in terms of how the political dynamics is shaping up, how policies are being debated and being targeted and being shared to the public, but more importantly, the political dynamics that exist inside the Sabah landscape. So here joining us is my friend Arif Adiputra, the research associate at IDS, or the Institute for Development Studies, Sabah. Adi, thank you very much. We've always had this idea of getting you on the show for quite some time, and what a momentous time for us to have you right now, considering that there's a lot that is being discussed at the Sabah elections. But having said that, this is what we were expecting anyway. There's nothing new in terms of the kind of chatter and drama. I mean, Iwan just resigned a few days ago, and UPCO just took themselves out of PH. GRS has just made the announcement a few days ago. This followed very closely with BN and PH, and I think the first was BAP. And of course, you know, the big ones have been mentioned, but you know, we never know. Nomination day is nomination day. We might see some surprises. How has the political drama shaped up, and is it part of what IDS thinks of how this election is going to be taking shape?
I think it reflects a very broad sentiment when it comes to Sabah's election, which is that it's always been seen as dynamic. Things are always ever shifting, alliances always changes. At this point, it's the most dynamic it's ever been. You have almost as many parties as you have seats up for grabs, right?
Okay, wait. Normally when people say an election is coming up, they will always say that line. This is the craziest that it has ever been. But is it truly?
Yeah, it's been on an upward trend, because now you have a lot of parties putting their hat within the election itself. You have more freedom for parties to actually enter politics, because some branch off from previous more established parties, more conventional parties, and they decide, hey, we have an issue here that the leadership doesn't listen to, I can form a party. So it's very easy to form one. It's easy to go as an independent candidate. So for some people, it's saying now than before, it's the most democratic election Sabah has ever seen, because you have so much choice. Some even just standing on one particular issue. You have parties that just stand on the Zara issue itself, and that's the entire campaign slogan.
Yeah.
So you have parties for all kinds of flavors, but of course you have the big ones that's going to be considered anything serious for this upcoming election.
Let's talk about the Sabah Black Wave, I suppose. Many viewers, especially in Semenanjung or Peninsula, might not be familiar altogether. You can share that with our audience?
I think it just comes from a general sentiment that established parties are not functioning according to some people that do support the Black Wave, and they thought that rather than actually having to go with a party or a coalition, and then there's a lot of internal negotiation going along, why not we just cast a stone and see where it lands? What's the result going to be? And I believe the Black Wave led by Dato' Verdon has already planned for 13 seats all along the West Coast. From his base of operations in Kudat, except for Rapi-Api. They are not so confident in urban seats, very urban seat there. But they're going to see just where it goes, where it lands. And he did say that independent Aduns have never been in the opposition. So see where it goes, who gives the best offer. That's also going to be a general trend as we look at this election itself, the negotiating and the horse trading that goes behind the scenes.
So, of course, IDS has been working quite closely with many of these individuals, such as the people that are currently putting their names in the hat. And of course, policy direction is one area of concern that I want to explore shortly in our discussion. But still on the political dynamics, right now there's no clear winner, so to speak, even after so close to the polling date. Does this worry the politicos out there right now? And are they trying to put their best feet forward, or more mudslinging is expected to be done?
I think a bit of both. Everyone is doing the rhetoric in public, but also in private, they are also having their own internal negotiations with one another. If I had to give an analogy, is like, let's say you have a WhatsApp group of 5 people, right? You don't like one person, you make a WhatsApp group of 4 people without the one guy you don't like. Then that guy makes a WhatsApp group with 4 people with one guy he doesn't like. So you have the entire combination of the 5 people and every permutation and configuration that you have. Everyone is talking to each other, minus someone they don't want to be listening, to be eavesdropping in. That is the current situation and dynamic we have right now. Everyone behind the scenes are talking to see what kind of potential pact can be made. Because at this point, it looks to be that no one is able to form a simple majority. So it's forced to make coalitions, forced to make alliances. Some that has broken off, maybe they'll reform back to make another coalition itself. And that is something that was going to be a defining characteristic of this election, if anything else.
But that would also mean they can't go full-throated assault on their political opponents, because you never know. In 2 weeks' time, while I go hardcore attacking that particular person or that particular party or that particular issue, in 2 weeks' time, I might have to lick my own wounds and come back and make an alliance with these kind of people that I just attacked. Does that bring about some form of decorum at least?
Not really, because it's normal for everyone to be mudslinging, then suddenly working back together. Back when the Warisan Plus coalition, which was Warisan, DAP, PKR, they were riding on the reform agenda, they were riding on the anti-corruption agenda. Next thing you know, DAP is suddenly working with GRS.
Yeah.
PH is working with GRS itself, right?
Yeah.
And then now they have these issues of scandals and all these alleged scandals and videos coming out. They're still keeping keeping hush about it, right? So loyalty depends on, really, doesn't matter what you say, that's all in the past, because everyone are to an extent friends with one another in Sabah. So comes a time there was always some channel to approach one another and say, hey, we worked together before, let's try we can work something out again.
Yeah. Let's also go to the most important stakeholder, the Rakyat. We're looking at over 3 million voters for this particular election. What is the sentiment amongst the Rakyat today?
I think general confusion for Rakyat in Sabah. Because with so many parties, we've never had this much choice or availability. So it throws a spanner into the works. Now people are thinking, okay, this party talks about this, Sabah for Sabahans, or Sabah rights, but this party also talks about Sabah for Sabahans. Just a different flavor, maybe different ethnic focus, right? Maybe different religious focus, right? So that makes voters confused. They don't know who to really vote for, because it seems that everybody is saying the same thing. They are pushing for the same issues and they're pushing for the same agenda. It's just that maybe the ethnic composition of the parties are different. So that could have a bearing on decision, but most of the time we have a lot of people in Sabah, voters, especially more older voters who are a bit more experienced in this. They don't know who to vote for anymore. The conventional choices are almost long gone. It's not the same days of UMNO, which is very monolithic, which was quite the obvious choice for many people. Now you're split. You have so much choice that you don't really know where to go.
Does that apply to the first-time voters as well, where the general confusion is actually prevalent?
Definitely, especially with young voters, because for some, this is going to be their first ever election.
Yeah.
And they're overwhelmed with what each party brings to the table, because what we've gathered from a lot of the youth is that they all seem the same, but there's so many of them. So what happens when you do with a lot of the same, right? Do you just throw a rock and then see where it lands? Or are there more methodical considerations to be made? Definitely in the urban areas, it's a bit more obvious, which they're more aware of good governance, these ideas of good governance and reform, where they want to see Sabah governance taken to a much more mature level. They would look to a party that's able to showcase those kinds of qualities and elements and what they can promise. But if you look in the rural area, it's also, it's completely different. Not sure what to do, not sure what to make of these choices. At the end of the day, is what can these parties really offer that's tangible and on the ground, that directly resonates with them in a direct way.
And so because of this, do you believe that voter turnout is going to be an issue? We might not see a great number of voter turnout for this election.
I've heard with issues with voter turnout is going to...
Especially transport cost is overwhelming right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean...
But that's always been the case for Sabah. Yeah, but more so now.
I mean, historically, voter turnout with Sabah has always been about 55% to 60% there, just about more than half. But this time around, we see a lot of talk saying that a lot of people not going out to vote this time. A lot of experienced people who have gone through many elections, they might not be going out to vote. Now, will this be offset by younger people who a lot of campaigns have been done for them to go out to vote? It's another story, because now youth makes up at least 55% of the Sabahan
What,
electorate.
really?
Yeah, so it's very youth-driven this time. Whether or not they will come out to vote is another story entirely, because historically they have never been very active in coming out to vote. I believe in the last election the turnout was about 17%, very, very low among youth. So there's a lack of engagement with youth, which a lot of...
Also total youth, 100%, only 17 came out. This is the last election.
Yeah, sad to say. I mean, it's very disconcerting, because there hasn't been much attempt to engage with the youth when it comes to political messaging or even outreach.
And let's now move and pivot towards policy, which is your mainstay and your, I guess, bread and butter issue right now. I want to ask you about some of the policies that is currently being talked about. You touched very briefly just now about Sabah for Sabahans. That's one. Another issue is on revenue and royalties, where the Kota Kinabalu High Court has just made a verdict that the federal government must give 40% of revenue, of which they have not yet honoured. Another angle is on race relations. And for many of the Malaysians right now, especially those in Semenanjung, they might not be even aware of the racial dynamics and the religious overtones that is befalling such a beautiful state like Sabah, from the KDMR to the Malay, what do you call this, coastal areas and so on. And then, of course, the fourth area is on some key issues on infrastructure, as well as debt and how to grow investments and tourism. So as you can see, there's a lot of issues that is currently needs to be talked about. Let's start with the big one, which is federalism, Sabah for Sabahans. Where does the issue lie today, and how are the political parties approaching this issue per se?
I believe the whole Sabah for Sabah scenario, which I believe Parti Star with Datuk Dr. Gitingan, who exited GRS, is heavily promoting, carries this undertone that Sabah for Sabahans, which means that whatever has been perceived to be taken from Sabah must be returned and must be honoured under the auspices of the Malaysian Agreement of 1963, which carries weight within the federal constitution. So these are things, rights that are enshrined, almost in a sacred fashion. We have a oath stone in Keningau that kind of captures that spirit of agreement of the formation.
Oath stone?
An oath stone.
Oath stone?
A stone with
Sumpah,
batu sumpah. Yes. So this is a symbolic manifestation of the agreement that was made. It's in the Constitution. So for Sabah Sabahans is to uphold the sanctity of the Constitution that guarantees Sabah particular rights which a lot of Sabahans, leaders and the people, feel have been taken away from them over time. There's a merit to this perception as well. There's many times the High Court ruling has proven that the federal government has erred in not paying Sabah the 40% that it is owed. In the wording is 2/5 revenue. Now the issue is...
Oh, that's the 40%?
Yes, that's what 2/5 calculated as 40%. Okay. Now the issue is that with what the Prime Minister himself has said, that apparently this is...
Just 2 days ago,
actually. 2 days ago at Gaya Street, saying that 10 billion has been taken out from Sabah and 17 billion has been given back. This is in reference to what he said last year at KDCA during the Kamantan Festival, said that 16 billion has been given to Sabah, and that is more than 40%. Now the issue with this, and this is what law leaders are going to use as Sabah Sabahans, is that how is the 40% calculated? This 10 billion, 17 billion, 16 billion, where is it derived from? Because there's a lot of muddy grey areas here that we have to talk about. Is that revenue, what counts as revenue? In the wording on the Constitution, it says net revenue, but we know tax revenue is a federal jurisdiction. It's a federal function.
Yeah.
So what does it mean by revenue exactly? Revenue sources, that needs to be properly clarified. And until then, people is going to rile up the Sabah for Sabah sentiment, saying that, see, this is more masking, more obfuscating the promises that are supposed to be given, and it's going to delay the entire processes for restoring Sabah's rights back to Sabah, taken from the federal government. So that's the Sabah Sabah angle that's being taken now. It's a sense of being aggrieved, and then that brews into a sense of antagonism, with a lot of Sabahans now saying that, you see, the federal government is taking advantage of us, which is the perception that the federal government shouldn't be developing because we agreed to form Malaysia together.
So do you think that this falls nicely into my second argument on policy, which is greater autonomy on Sabah determining their own fate? And your policy paper that I read that was published under IDS, that was a very intriguing piece of work in my opinion, because you argued that it starts with even the name of the chief executive of the government of Sabah, where you make parallels of Sarawak being premier instead of chief minister of Sabah, because that would equate Sabah to, say, for instance, states like Melaka and Penang, who has the same notion of chief minister, but the Sabah chief minister is inherently a little bit more than what achievements of Malacca and Penang has. You also argue that even the name of the state is also needs to be debated because it is enshrined under Schedule 1 of the Federal Constitution that talks about Sabah and Sarawak and at that point in time Singapore being a wilayah. So, you know, forget about the details of the policies, even the name and the identity, so to speak, needs to be reclarified. And you argued that it is well within Sabah jurisdiction to determine for themselves their own nomenclature. So do you feel that that should be the starting point for everything else when it comes to determining more autonomy for Sabah in pursuit of us having a stronger federalism?
Because language matters very much. If we say, use the same terms and words in nomenclature that's associated with something else, we start to see that there's more similarities than there are actually differences.
Yeah.
Article 1.2 specifically says, and we fought to amend this in the Constitution.
Yeah,
Sabah
and has been
Sarawak-
amended.
It has been amended. It has, Sabah and Sarawak are distinct from the other states in Malaya. And that comes under, if you look back at history, how Malaysia was formed. It wasn't all the states plus one, plus one, plus one. It was 1 plus 1 plus 1. Singapore you can keep not consider anymore, which is...
Yeah, well, it was an amalgamation of four countries,
yes.
And then one exited.
Yeah, so it
if you ask a Singaporean, they say they were ejected.
They have their own
their own version of
Yeah.
how things happen, but you know,
but
let's,
whatever it is, Singapore's happy being
they're
where they are.
They're very happy with it.
More power to them.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's the Malayan Federation, Sarawak, and Sabah. So Malayan Federation is all these states that we have in Semenanjung. So we need to be very, very specific in making sure that this spirit of the agreement is reflected in identity, reflected in the language that we use. I made the argument saying that we're using a title that is similar to Malacca, similar to Penang, states within Malaya itself, that was under the Malayan Federation. So does that give the connotation that we are the same as Malacca and Penang? For some people that I've talked to who have always talked about Sabah identity, yeah, it kind of makes it sound the same. It flattens out the identity part. When Sabah and Sarawak are very, very distinct, not just culturally speaking, but geographically as well. You can look at other examples of federations like in Russia, Tatarstan. They even have, they used to have the head of state there as called the president. So why not we also start to look at what Sarawak's doing? They're calling themselves premier because they are different and they have a different set of histories compared to Malaya here. And this doesn't require any move from the parliament side because this only needs to be amended at the state constitution, which requires 2/3 majority, same as what Sarawak did. So these words and how we play with these words really sets apart Sabah and Sarawak vis-a-vis to Semenanjung, and that sets the tone. It refreshes the narrative, and when negotiators come back and forth, they say that okay, we have to engage with the premier, not a chief minister.
Yeah.
It carries off a different kind of set of circumstances, a set of thinking. The mode of thinking sort of slowly shifts.
Even the deputies of the chief executive of the state, they are not considered state excos the way we would in Semenanjung. They are considered ministers.
Yeah.
Outright ministers. Minister of Sabah for economy, Minister of Sabah for tourism and so on. Just like how we see in Sarawak. So even then, it's also a big distinction in terms of the deputies or the subsidiaries of the chief executive per se. Now, you say that you need just a 2/3 majority at the Sabah parliament, but why is it not done if it's just that? Wouldn't Sabah, despite their political differences, rally behind this notion? Because after all, it's for the benefit of Sabah. Why hasn't it been done? Where is the political will and why is it missing?
Largely because it's not really part of mainstream conversation. We looked to how Sarawak changed to premier, but it did not exactly resonate in the sense that to the political leaders in Sabah saying, hey, why not we start to think along those lines as well? When there were whispers from the ground and from some experts saying that maybe we should start thinking along those lines as well. Because when we see how Sabah was formed, even prior to that, during the North Borneo days in the British Crown Colony, Sabah compared to Semenanjung was never a sovereign kingdom. It was never held by a monarch. And in fact,
I don't know, the Sulu family descendants might argue that.
They claim parts, apparently, but we don't know who they are now. But you see that its set of histories really does dictate how we perceive ourselves as a state itself, as a nation state. So we have to also look back towards that. We had a conversation had with a expert of mine, the one I want to name, but he said we could have been a republic. We might as well just be called republic. We never had a king, we never had a sultan, we never had a sovereign, a sovereign monarch. So that can also set ourselves different. So it's in line with what past Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin said, claiming that Sabah and Sarawak should be renamed to wilayah. Well, I think a lot of people got the wrong perception. They thought wilayah, they straight away thought wilayah persekutuan, federal territory, but wilayah itself,
a region,
designated region, very different from negeri.
Is it still out of the mainstream conversation?
It still is.
Oh, wow.
And not many people has lobbied to push for these changes, maybe because they feel that it doesn't bring tangible changes. But for me, I believe symbolic changes is just as important because it gives a clear idea of what kind of direction that we want to take, that we can aspire to. Sometimes when we want to have more tangible goals, we need to sometimes aspire to loftier ones as well.
When we talk about composition in language, you got the 4 W's and 1 H. The Y is very much important in terms of how you describe a thing and why you want to do it. But more importantly, the Y is derived from the who. Because the reason why you're doing it falls back to who you are as an identity, as a person. So Sabah right now, I would argue, based on this kind of proposition that you're putting forth today, is in a deeper situational issue because this is an identity crisis. Forget about economic crisis. Everybody goes through that and needs to resolve. But how Sabah identifies yourself is actually quite crucial. More importantly, how we identify Sabah is also quite important. Okay, that's one. Another area of concern is on some revenue-making policies. Some policies that involve revenue-making is all within Sabah powers as well, such as tourism and a few others. Do you feel that that also is not being discussed in terms of how you can actually create autonomy without getting clearance from anybody, from Putrajaya, from your partners in the federation, from the parliament, and so on? You could have just executed this on your own, but it's not done, such as the tourism and communications, for instance. Why do you see these things as a non-starter yet for Sabah for today?
Because a lot of these functions still fall under the federal list. Tourism is still a federal function. To amend that, you need to negotiate and lobby at the national parliament, which requires 2/3. Very difficult to push forward for something like that. So that's why Sarawak is now pushing for tourism to be under the concurrent list. So they're still working on that. However, we are still, I believe Sabah is still not catching on to coming on the bandwagon to articulate it in the parliament as well, which is quite a shame because Sabahan tourism cannot be defined easily along the same lines as the national policy. Because Sabah tourism, for one, is that it caters to tourists directly from China. You have flights directly from China, you have flights directly from Korea, and these tourists have a specific image and expectation of what kind of holidays that they want to have in Sabah, which is they want to experience the nature, they want to experience the sea, they want to experience the mountain, experience the jungle. However, now the issue of that we have in Sabah, which is very much rampant, is the idea of regulation. We have a Sabah Tourism Board that manages tourism mostly in Sabah and the ministry, but these mostly focus on marketing and promotion. We don't have much in terms of regulation and when it comes to monitoring. So with that said, when we move tourism, hopefully Sarawak will be successful, move to the current list, policy-wise, Sabah should also look to actively creating a Sabah Tourism Authority as well. An authority that's able to monitor, let's say, tour providers, all these licensed operators, to really review exactly, are these in compliance with a policy that is beneficial for the growth of Sabah's more tourism sector. This is able to look forward ahead, to be able to plan ahead even more and to properly define our tourism outlooks, our tourism policies, what kind of tourism that we want to cultivate over here in Sabah. Instead of having to wait for a decision at the national level, right? In the national ministry, it can straight away be addressed because it comes to the idea of local problems require local knowledge. Sometimes a policymaker in Putrajaya, in the tourism field, may see tourism from the lens of, let's say, Kuala Lumpur or Langkawi, But Sabah is a completely different
Sabah is
ballgame.
completely different.
Completely different
From
environment.
Malaya Basin to Karambunai to
don't even have to go far.
Sipadan.
The West Coast, East Coast, completely different. world.
Completely different. Completely different. The inland of Sabah is completely different. I was driving from Keningau to Ranau, of which I saw more than 10 billboards of Jeffrey Kitingan on Sabah. It's crazy. I've never seen anything like that before. It's going to different worlds. I don't know how to say it. From the Crocker Range, driving from KK to Keningau, from taking the inside road to Ranau, and then driving down south again to Tawau, Sandakan, Kunak, Lahad Datu. It's just a world apart. And of course, I'm an avid diver, so when I go to places like Sipadan, it's like, why am I paying a lot of money to go somewhere else when the treasure is right here in Malaysia? You know what I mean? But because of this notion, this whole idea of upgrading Sabah Tourism Board to become some sort of a Sabah Tourism Authority, again, where's the political will? It seems to be missing, even though there's a lot of upside when we talk about STA versus STB, for instance.
Now, this comes down to how we understand federalism in Sabah. We understand federalism under the framework of MA 63. Everything defaults back to the Malaysian Agreement 1963.
And what? 18-point plan?
The 20-point agreement, the Intergovernmental Committee report. So this is when Sabahans think of federalism, they think along this framework. Compared to Sarawak, they start to look beyond that framework. They start to look at the idea of federalism in terms of the arrangement of power between a central government and a regional government. A regional government may have different wants and needs compared to what the national government actually sees. So Sarawak has perfectly captured the idea of what does it mean to be with a part of a federation, which is that it's asymmetrical. Not every state is the same. We can look at the examples in the United States, where almost every state across are very much protective over the state rights, and they don't want too much national oversight. We can see it in the United Kingdom. Scotland itself has passed the Scotland Act in 2012, rebranded their executive committee to be the Scottish Parliament. Why don't we think along these lines of experimenting what it means to be Sabahan vis-a-vis here?
And call yourself First Minister or something
or something like that, right? We have room and ample room to experiment with how we want to define our place in the federation. And for some leaders in Sabah, they have not gotten to that point of developing that thought of federalism. But I believe that once a time, if MA 63 does get fulfilled, maybe they'll start to look at other aspirations of autonomy, or maybe they'll just leave it at that, because this is the issue now. Who would have thought tourism would have been one of Sabah's biggest industries? That wasn't discussed in the 60s by the founding fathers, by the leaders, right?
Yeah, that just naturally took place.
You see that it grew, so that means that if we follow strictly just by the framework of MA 63, we're not going to set ourselves up to address future concerns which autonomy might necessitate.
One last area that I want to explore is in terms of what are you looking at personally, Adi? I mean, for people who might not be familiar, he runs an excellent podcast called Kopitiam
Council.
Kopitiam Council, and you talk a bunch of issues there, and of course, more importantly, the research that you're doing also involves not just about Sabah and the federalism and the state and so on, but a few other things. But what are you looking at in 2026, and how does this election affect you personally?
I think the election has given us a lot to talk about, really. The podcast has been active. My partner Hafizul, he's been coming back to Sabah quite a lot, and we find ourselves interviewing a lot of political people in Sabah, not just that, but political experts as well, people who are also involved in politics, to see, okay, to give us a better idea and clearer picture on what's going on in Sabah. Sometimes you get a different perspective on certain areas, like we were talking to Dr. Bridget Welsh as well, who very well defined the northeast region of Sabah as having a bit of a nostalgia factor for the days of UMNO. That's present there, and I don't know if that's a sentiment that will manifest as support for GRS or UMNO, but regardless. that there's something to look forward to. Sabah itself is always an evolving landscape, and it's for sure that 29th November is, even by the last votes being cast, you start to have to see which hotels have what cars, what Ninja Kings or Hilux are going to be, where's the press going to be, right? That can give you an idea of who's talking to who exactly, and who knows how many days that's going to take when it comes to deciding a state, Sabah state government. Moving forward, I would like to see that leaders, because no one's going to form a simple majority, everyone's going to be forced to work together. It's going to be government of coalitions, to see how they're able to negotiate with one another, what kind of things that they can come to an agreement with policy-wise, and what kind of approach that they want to take with their relationship with the federal government, with the High Court ruling when the federal government chooses either to or not to appeal. What will the incoming state government's approach to those results going to be? If, let's say, the federal government does not appeal, which I hope they do not appeal, just leave it at that, finally start looking at the 40%, what are the negotiations that are going to take place in creating a mechanism so that 40% is going to be delivered back to Sabah? Because that is an issue that hasn't been brought up when it comes to mechanism, is that...
What about the possibility of it being appealed? The agency is already talking to the executive.
I think with the situation with APCO's exit, Dr. Iwan said that he will resign as a minister.
And has.
And he has, before a decision was even being made. Does that give a sign that he is privy to information on an appeal, which all signals that they're going to? The Prime Minister himself said that I would rather not appeal, but at the end of the day, Prime Minister does have a lot of say in how it works out, because we know that the judiciary is appointed at a very high level by the executive. The judiciary is still not independent in a way that it can make that decision by itself.
Of which this government aims to reform. But that's a different topic altogether. But having said that, again, how do you see this election? Is this the watershed moment of Sabah politics changing for a more matured landscape, or do you think this is just going to create a little bit more noise than previous elections?
I think it's going to be even more decisive than before. Everyone's going to be fighting for their own space. Everyone's trying to fight for their own representation. And if the government of the day that comes in is not able to handle those aspirations and interests of all the competing coalition partners that they're going to have, then we're going to see a lot more splits, a lot more exits, more walkouts. We've seen during the middle of Hajiji's tenure, the Langkah Kinabalu, where UMNO, en masse, or half of UMNO left the government to try to challenge their position for Chief Minister. Will we see more of that happening if whoever comes in is not able to manage their expectations? That is something that we have to look to in the next 4 to 5 years. This is what at least the Chief Minister, Dr. Sri Hajiji, has been able to do. He's been able to manage everyone's expectations, being able to manage the coalition quite relatively well, but at the same time balancing his relationship with the federal government. So we'll see how does that kind of attitude, will it completely change as an attitude, or will we see more of the similar kind of negotiating, very cordial attitude in the future?
Do you think that the Putrajaya element is going to play strong to some of the partners in Sabah? I.e., do you feel that Anwar's impact and influence and the national parties like PKR and DAP making some form of inroads there?
Given the situation with what happened at Kota Kinabalu Gaya Street the other day, with the Prime Minister talking to somebody on the 40%, I think that has done quite a bit of damage to PKR's reputation in Sabah. Already the Sabah for Sabahan sentiment is very strong. The want for local parties is very much there. And there's always been a rejection of Malaya-based national parties. So to double down on this kind of, I would say, to some people seeing as patronizing tone that the Prime Minister has demonstrated, would just push PKR in a more dangerous situation, and by extension does jeopardize their partners such as DAP, and by extension GRS, who has decided to work together with Pakatan Harapan. So this could also affect the perception of the people, saying that, well, GRS is in cahoots working together with PH, right, who already says these things. Why aren't they saying anything to challenge that kind of sentiment, right, that kind of rhetoric? APCO has already shown that they're not
willing to.
They're not sticking and sitting down. And they were the coordinators for Pakatan Harapan Sabah. For them to be able to walk out like that before even the decision was made showcases the fragility of working together with Pakatan Harapan, and shows that maybe aligning yourself with Pakatan Harapan, with the unity government, may do more damage than does give benefits.
Okay, we'll see how the election is going to pan out, and of course you can watch all the elements and of course updates on the Sabah elections on Astro AWANI. Sabah Memilih is our predominant show covering the elections. There's going to be a lot more of content like this in the weeks to come until 29th of November, and even so, Adi, you're not the first person nor the last person to say that negotiations might further take place even after the polling day to determine who has the willpower and the political will and mandate to actually govern Sabah. So there's a lot of developments here. Until then, thanks very much for watching. Catch you in the next one.
Di era digital, pemasaran bukan hanya tentang penjualan semata-mata. Penceritaan menarik jadi kekuatan dalam membina hubungan perniagaan, tingkat pengetahuan, perkasakan perniagaan anda. Saksikan segmen Jiwa SME dalam program Awani Pagi dan Niaga Awani setiap Isnin hingga Khamis di saluran 501. Dibawakan oleh penaja utama jelajah Jiwa SME, Unify Business, rakan digital pilihan anda.
Dalam keadaan sekarang kau tak ada pilihan. Kalau tak aku tahan kau, aku sumbat kau dalam longkang.
Tuan, dengar tak? Nama suspek Dali, Tuan. Nama suspek Dali.
Ada yang perdebatan bahawa GST perlu dikembalikan semula kerana ada yang mempertikaikan bahawa SST itu tidak efektif.
Isu buruh kanak-kanak bukan sahaja dalam bentuk fizikal tetapi juga bentuk moden yang lebih licik dan juga terselindung.
Kita tengok buruh kanak-kanak dan ada juga buruh paksa kanak-kanak.
Kumpulan FB dikenali sebagai grup budak-budak sekolah rendah yang didakwa menyebarkan gambar remaja perempuan tidak senonoh telah pun ditutup.
Asia tumpuan utama dunia. Dengan ekonomi yang semakin rancak, pembangunan lestari dan tenaga boleh diperbaharui, apakah pula impak kecerdasan buatan AI dalam perkembangan teknologi dan masa depan pekerjaan? Kami mendalami setiap berita dan cerita. Saksikan diskusi, dialog dan laporan khas di Agenda Awani Asia bersama koresponden khas kami setiap Sabtu 9 malam di semua platform Astro Awani.
Kesihatan yang tidak berapa bagus.
Kejutan berlaku.
Minggu ni jangan ada penyingkiran.
Peluang kedua diberikan untuk buktikan kelayakan mereka.
Kita nak tengok benda-benda lain juga. You tonjolkan siapa diri you sebenarnya.
Bila dia nyanyi lagu orang putih, intonasi pula Melayu. Songsang betul.